Okay, so the first big question is why Ecuador? There's two reasons why I decided to research Ecuador for this project. The first reason being that I really had no prior knowledge about Ecuador before this project, and I really wanted to broaden my knowledge base about Latin American countries through this project. The second reason is because Ecuador is a Spanish-speaking country, and my L2 is Spanish, so I really wanted to pick a Spanish-speaking country because if I were to go teach English abroad, it would be, I would definitely choose a Spanish-speaking country to do so. Okay, now for a very, very brief history of Ecuador. The first major happening in Ecuador's history is when they were settled by the Spanish in 1526. They were under Spanish rule until the early 19th century when they became very disconnected with the Spanish rule and decided to join Gran Colombia, which includes today's Venezuela and Colombia. They withdrew from that, so they were part of Gran Colombia in 1822, and then 8 years later, in 1830, they withdrew from Gran Colombia and wanted to be their own country. As far as their economy goes, in the late 19th century, their cacao population boomed and improved their economy a great deal. Also, oil was discovered in Ecuador in 1967, and it became Ecuador's main export. And due to this, because of the changing prices in world oil, Ecuador's economy is very dependent on the oil and the changing prices. And when the prices go down, their economy receives a large hit, and when the prices go up, their economy improves. As you can see, Ecuador is very, very linguistically diverse. Their official language is Spanish, but they also recognize a second official language, and that is called Quechua. And the light fuchsia color that you see around the whole country represents areas that speak Quechua. There are 800,000 monolinguals of Quechua, and it's the most developing language in Ecuador, according to the Ethnologue website. The type of English that is taught in Ecuador is very standard and aligns very well with the type of English that we learn here in the United States. Although they're taught a very standard form of English, the sounds that they can produce as native speakers of Spanish or Quechua can cause their accents when speaking English to vary. For example, their theta sound, the th sound in English, can often sound like a d sound instead of the th sound, and that I found on the Speech Accent Archive website. Alright, now we are going to dive into the cultural dimensions in Ecuador. So, the first major cultural dimension in Ecuador is that Ecuador is a very collectivist country. Belonging to a group in Ecuador is extremely important. So they value their social classes and religions because those are the types of groups that makes them feel like they're a part of something. They identify greatly with their race, and also different indigenous cultures identify with one another on an extremely personal level, and that was on the What About Ecuador website that I found that. As far as their sense of time, they are very similar to the rest of Latin American countries, where they have a very relaxed concept of time. So if class is starting at 4 o'clock, you might not receive any students until 4:30 or 5. Now, comparing Ecuador's culture to the United States, I think that the biggest difference between the US and Ecuador is the fact that the US is more of an individualistic culture and Ecuador is a collectivist culture. So I think that in the United States, we focus a lot on ourselves and improving ourselves rather than focusing on the groups that we belong to. In Ecuador, they're very oriented to the groups in which they belong, whether it be race, ethnicity, religion, social class. So when teaching these future students in Ecuador, I need to keep in mind about the fact that they identify greatly with their groups in which they associate themselves with, and I need to make sure that I'm not making them push their boundaries between groups because being a part of that group is very important to them. This is a quote I received from Dr. Lake, who is a Spanish professor here at UWL. Every year, she brings a group of students to Ecuador to volunteer and study the language while being in a Spanish-speaking country. I asked her what the biggest difference between Ecuador and the United States was to her, and she responded with, "The biggest difference? Wow, hard question. I think it would be the more relaxed attitude toward life. If buses don't run on time, it's no big deal, for example. I think another difference is that people are very happy with what they have. It doesn't matter if it's a lot or a little." The education system in Ecuador is comprised of 6 years of primary school and 6 years of secondary education. The secondary education is split into two levels. The first level is El Ciclo Básico, and the second is El Ciclo Diversificado, and I found that on west.com. Students may then move on to university level education, in which they follow a similar path as we do here in the United States. So they go for 4 years for their undergraduate and then 2 years for graduate education, and then they can go even further on, just like we can, to get a doctorate or go on to medical school or other specialized fields. The amount of resources that a school in Ecuador has depends greatly on whether the school is situated in a very rural or very highly populated part of Ecuador. So, as you can see, the western coast of Ecuador is much more populated than that of the eastern, and on the eastern side of Ecuador is where you find a lot of the more rural schools and the schools with less resources. There is a very large difference between private schools and public schools in Ecuador. In private schools, students have a lot more access to resources, and there are a lot more well qualified teachers that teach in the private schools who will help kids get to the college level. However, in public schools, which are often found in the more rural parts of Ecuador, they don't have as many resources as the private schools, but they are free for children to attend. Now we're going to discuss the English language education policies in Ecuador. When I asked Dr. Lake her opinion on the role of English in Ecuador, she responded with, "English plays a large part in certain sectors of society. For example, the wealthier classes generally know English or use English in their jobs. Lower middle class to the poorer classes don't use English much unless they work with tourists. I get the feeling a lot of people would like to know English but don't have the means to study it. I really didn't see much English in advertisements. Their satellite channels, if people have a satellite, right, has loads of American programs, so people can watch TV and learn if they want." According to BritishCouncil.org, Ecuador's English language policy currently aims to have English as an optional language from grade 2 and a mandatory language from grade 8. So, as you can see from the graph, a majority of students learn English during their time in secondary school, and the amount of learners continues to decrease as you get into primary schooling and other options such as while abroad or studying English for a career. Also, according to BritishCouncil.org, a large reason why students haven't learned English is because of the lack of access to government funded programs. So, students don't have the financial means to study English. The Ministry of Education in Ecuador has set standards for English language teachers, and those include proficiency in the language and understanding of cultural beliefs of that language, so English, a solid sense of curriculum and being able to plan lessons that will only lead your students into the right direction in their English language learning process, and an understanding of how to assess your students and overall professionalism. Lastly, I'd like to discuss the different challenges that teachers may face when teaching English abroad in Ecuador. The first is educational challenges. So, my biggest challenge that I thought of that dealt with education is the concept of ethical commitment. This is one of the standards that the Ministry of Education has placed on English teachers in Ecuador, and I was confused overall about the idea of ethical commitment. This came up in one of our discussion boards and the case studies about what we would do if our school thought that we weren't allowed to incorporate Western culture into our curriculum at all. And so I think a solution to this is to really nail down the concept of ethical commitment and what that means to your school, even before accepting the job. Once you understand the idea of ethical commitment in its whole, then you can go and figure out ways to still incorporate aspects of culture that you want without stepping on any toes at your school. So the overall solution that I came up with is just communication with those higher ups at your school, and just keep it open and honest and let them know what you need as a teacher. As far as linguistic challenges go, I think the biggest linguistic challenge that you'll face in Ecuador is the concept of the two recognized official languages of Ecuador. So you don't know if your students will be native speakers of Quechua or Spanish when you first enter the English classroom. So my solution that I thought of for this would be to evaluate the kids at the beginning of the year, which you will probably be doing anyway, and figure out what their L1 is and go from there. It will be important for you to have different strategies to teach native speakers of Quechua and native speakers of Spanish, because they're not going to learn English the same way because of their different L1s. Now for cultural challenges, in my opinion, the biggest cultural challenge that you will face when in Ecuador, especially coming from somewhere like the United States, is the concept of time and the relaxed concept of time that they have in Ecuador. So I've heard of people who have taught English in Colombia, for example, who the teacher is ready to go at 4 o'clock, ready for class, and no students are there. Class starts at 4, no students are in their classroom. So a big way that you can get around this cultural challenge is to plan for their concept of time, not your concept of time. So if you don't want to get to work until 4 o'clock, which is when class is supposed to start, and then you have that 20 minutes of prep time until your students start walking into your classroom, then you can plan for that. Think of it as more of a blessing than a challenge. Overall, I've learned a lot about Ecuador through this project. I've learned about the culture of Ecuador that exists under the tip of the iceberg, and about the indigenous cultures and the role that they play. This knowledge will help me know what to expect upon my arrival in Ecuador and how to better educate my future students of English.